Today I bring to you a brief history of medical advertising, mostly British and American, because you know, they like to talk about themselves, so that's the information I can find, and also because they had like a big influence on regulation.
Oh my
narcotics,
goodness. I just
mother's favourite.
huh?
No?
This isn't a proper image. This has got custom stuff in it.
Yeah, I made this one. You can look at that later. Let's talk about quacks.
Quack.
Big thing of mine, etymology. I'm that guy. I finally managed to get it onto the show. The word quack comes from a Dutch word, Middle Dutch word, quacksalver. Quack meaning to boast or brag. Salve being like an ointment, salve. And nobody's going to pretend to you that there aren't quacks in 2021. COVID has brought them out in full force. And, you know, there's always Gwyneth Paltrow. But one thing we do have going for us is that at least pharmaceutical companies in their own advertisements are regulated. They can't make outrageous claims and they have to warn you of the risks, basically.
I feel like maybe that is that's maybe a portent of things to come.
It certainly wasn't always the case. So the history of medical advertising really begins with kind of urbanization and print media in like the 17th century. In fact, medicines were like the first major item to be advertised and like really foundational for many of the ways that products remain advertised now. But this was like based on trust. So people are coming from fairly tight-knit communities where you know everybody by name. And so how you choose to trust an advert, they used names and addresses of specific people who could vouch for the quality of the medicine. They also say, ask specifically for this brand. And this is like really the beginning of branding, because it implies that, for one thing, the product is worth counterfeiting. And for another thing, it builds a relationship between the customer and the product rather than between the customer and the seller and the product, which really expanded people's ability to sell anything at that kind of scale. And patents, they're patent medicines that claimed to a patent medicine could be made by anyone. It could contain anything, and they could cure anything too. So this one on the third one that you see here claims to cure seminal weakness, which is nocturnal emissions as far as I can tell, gout, disorders of the stomach, venereal disease mild and serious, probably meaning gonorrhea and syphilis, rheumatism, scurvy, nervous disorders, and bladder stones.
Wow. And that's just one thing.
That's just one medicine.
It's a real wonder drug.
These were called patent medicines, and the other thing they all did was claim to have a patent from the king. But in fact, that is very unlikely that very many of them, some of them did. It's very unlikely that many of them did, partly because it cost money, partly because there weren't patents on chemicals in the US, at least until like 1925 or something, and also because to have a patent you need to publicly disclose the ingredients, and either because they don't want people copying it or they don't want people knowing what's in it, they didn't especially want to do that. So this here is Mrs Winslow's soothing syrup, which was for teething children, cranky children, any children if they
Did it have heroin in it?
You could.
So it's Calpol?
Yeah, opium, yeah.
Yeah.
So opium for children, known as baby killer, responsible for thousands of deaths of infants. and sold until like the 1930s, I think.
Oh god.
Buy and sell this.
They're just like,
Yeah.
hey, do you want your baby to stop crying right now?
Yeah.
Drug it into oblivion.
It's not like these medicines didn't work. I mean, opium has a lot of effect on the body. So when they say it can cure your diarrhea, I mean, it does make you constipated. So like, and
Yeah,
obviously
yeah.
it is a
I mean,
pain
there are
reliever.
other things I would do to cure my diarrhea.
Yeah.
Other than take
It's
opium.
just, they also have very, very nasty side effects.
Like death.
Opium was not, like death. Opium was not the only dangerous ingredient found in patent medicines that claim to do everything. Also, you could find cocaine, alcohol, arsenic, other opiates, just a bunch of other bad stuff that you don't want to know about, turpentine, vegetables, and also very popular until like the 1920s, mummies,
Turpentine?
ground up mummies.
I've heard about those.
Yeah, I've heard of
focus
the
on
ground-up monies.
They put ground up mummies in medicines because in Islamic medicine for centuries there was something that shared the same name but was not the same thing as one of the things, what do you call them? Ointments, I don't know, used in the mummification process. And then I guess people got a bit confused between those two things, and then they got confused in thinking that the
Got
mummy
their wires
was
very crossed.
So by the early 20th century, there was an understanding in people's minds that there's a difference between ethical medicines that you might get through your doctor and patent medicines that are marketed at everybody, possibly at people who can't afford doctors, that are not half as effective and or not half as safe.
So patent medicine kind of in that context means like cure-all type nothingness.
Yeah.
Right.
The kind of panacea that's probably opium and
Too good to be true.
and alcohol and
Right.
whatever oil they could find to mix it in.
Mm-hmm.
Snake oil being the classic, wasn't actually made of snake, didn't actually do anything, but was touted
Was
as
it
cure for
actually oil?
everything.
Was it actually oil?
I think it was actually oil. And then in 1905 there was this series of expose articles published in Collier's that really like got to the American national imagination and kind of exposed how many people were dying really from either the use of patent medicine or the use of patent medicine in preference to other forms of medicine. And so in 1906 there was the first real restrictions placed on advertising of drugs.
I really love that like Art Nouveau style like snake border on the article.
Yeah, I think it was a good piece of work. Like, good job all round. So the 1905 series of exposés prompted 1906 regulation that drugs have to list their ingredients on the outside of the packaging, and also that the ingredients have to be pure. It doesn't specify what they can be, but there are requirements on their purity. But in 1911 there was a court case to decide essentially whether or not pharmaceutical companies were allowed to lie about the effects of their product. So they had to say what was in them, but did they have to make true claims about what they did? Can you guess what the court went for under those circumstances?
Based on the fact that you're asking us to guess, I'm going to assume that they said outright that drug companies are allowed to lie about what their
Drug companies are allowed to lie about what their products do. Woohoo!
Bit of a leading question there.
Yeah. But in 1912, there was an act passed that stated that in the US that stated that it is illegal if you can prove fraudulent intent, which obviously is not that easy to prove.
So basically, they're now only allowed to lie if they can claim that they didn't know that they were lying.
Yeah.
So just don't write down that you're about to lie.
Especially don't do any clinical trials.
Right.
But then in 1937, over 100 people died of one specific under-regulated drug. And so this is kind of how drug regulation happened from that point forward. Something really bad would happen, and then they go, oh shit, we need to regulate this. But yeah, in 1938, there was a law passed that the FDA needed to approve the safety, not the efficacy, but the safety of a drug.
Right.
Before,
So you're allowed to scam people, you're just not allowed to actively kill people.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Although, I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched a chubby emu video, but anything can be deadly if you ingest enough of it. Over-the-counter medication.
Sorry, what?
Chubby emu, he's a doctor on YouTube who talks about what happens if you take too much laxative.
I thought it was just like I thought you meant like an actual emu.
No.
It's like, how does this emu know so much?
Are they eating the emu? Is it bad to eat emu?
They're quite addictive videos and also quite terrifying.
Okay.
I'm gonna binge a whole load of them after this now. Then.
Yeah. So the next big catastrophe was in Britain in the late 1950s, a drug that actually wasn't approved for sale in America.
Thalidomide, right?
Thalidomide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That like sped up British regulatory agencies were already looking into pharmaceutical regulation, but it really catalyzed that process. In 1962 in the US, from that point they had to prove efficacy as well as safety, and in fact that led to a whole bunch of like progress in pharmaceuticals. People having to do clinical trials on their products before they could be sold.
It's so grim, the idea of any of them not having to do that, right? It's just so obviously expected now.
Yeah. Until the 1980s, they were mostly concerned with advertising drugs to like prescription strength drugs to doctors. So in medical journals, I've got you some examples of adverts from medical journals in the 1940s. By the 1980s, there was the beginning of a conversation, patient rights, consumer rights, and in the United States and New Zealand, direct-to-consumer advertising became available for prescription strength drugs.
It's creepy, isn't it? I've seen a few sort of American advertisements for medication, and it's weird.
Yeah. And that's where you get those adverts with a long list of side effects at the end, because they have to put those there, although the FDA is considering reduce, or maybe did allow a reduction in the number of side effects that you list at the end of an advert, partly because their own studies show that people just tune out and they're not really paying attention the whole time.
Because you can't prioritize them as well, because it's like some of them are going to be really irrelevant, some of them are going to be extremely rare, some of them are going to be not necessarily things that are conclusively associated with the drug itself, but it's just happened to some people on the clinical trial, and it's not even necessarily like but they have to say anyway this could be a side effect, even if it's not necessarily, like, they haven't proven yet that it is.
Which makes you just mean you need to buy a lot more TV time as well. But yeah, this is this conversation about patients as consumers. So consumer is used in two quite distinct ways. In the literature, it just means a person who's taking the drug. But also, this is the 80s we're talking about. Consumer also means the person who's going to pay for the drug.
Voting with your wallet.
And yeah, so this causes a lot of problems. That it's a very controversial over-medicalization of, even if it's not a prescription drug, all those adverts that are just like, are your private parts disgusting? Do you need something to fix that? Like just real like over-medicalization of fairly normal things, or if not medicalized, like maybe it's a medical issue, but shame.
Ask your doctor about this.
Like halitosis.
Yeah, not a real thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly like that. And also the other thing is it means patients are going to doctors saying, I need this drug, which, like, it's a good thing for patients to be informed about what drugs do, but it's not self-diagnosis is not necessarily the best thing there, especially if they can leave a bad Yelp review if they don't get the kind of treatment that they want.
Yeah. You want people to be able to advocate for themselves, but also you don't want them to be convinced that this thing is the only thing that will solve their problems when they've just been sold it by a snake oil salesman.
Yeah, you basically want the source of their information to not be interested in them purchasing a product from them.
Yeah.
But, as we know, there are still plenty of areas of like health advertising that are not regulated in the same way. Might be that it's a food that's like they heavily imply that eating blueberries is gonna fix your skin problems.
Yeah, superfoods, good old charcoal croissants.
Carrots make you see in the dark.
Cosmetics aren't regulated in the same way. You can make unrealistic claims as long as they aren't medical claims, basically.
So it's like those sort of like, we surveyed 100 people.
Yeah.
So firming is undefined. A skin cream can describe itself as firming. And yeah, just when you've got influencers telling you what they think is good for you.
Yes.
Especially bad with like weight loss stuff, right?
This episode was brought to you by Nutri something.
Cocaine, which they like at some point it was recommended as a cure for if you have a cold, because it vasoconstricts. So if you get it in your nose, the veins in your nose shrink. They use it in nose jobs apparently. Today they use cocaine in nose jobs to stop it from bleeding as much. Exciting times.
That's interesting.
We live in. So if you want to get pumped, go get a rhinoplasty.
Go have a nose job.